Good news, everyone! Tonight, JK gets ratioed, lots of laws, Chloe Cole comes clean, and more. Good news starts right now. First up, the people stand against J.K. Rowling. Following the showdown with David Tennant and her actual denial of war crimes, among other malfeasance, the transphobic author, sometimes known as Robert Galbraith, has alienated more of her once devoted fanbase than ever, to the point that a hashtag started trending: I stand against J.K. Rowling. Naturally, her remaining political allies attempted to reverse the tide of public opinion by trying to force the reverse tag, I stand with J.K. Rowling, a mirror of the embattled writer's own I stand with Maya tag that made it clear she was no longer interested in facts, honesty, or good faith discussion. Needless to say, it did not go well. The near-universal shun continued to grow by thousands until virtually everyone still left on Twitter had taken part. While it must be said, in the court of public opinion, Rowling still garnered more votes than her bestie, anti-feminist, and friend of actual Nazis Kelly J did in the real UK election, she clearly no longer commands enough loyalty to even achieve a 50-50 split. She got destroyed by an order of magnitude and then some, and we love to see it. Next, as reported on previously in TheTransPositions, today, August 1st, is the day the updated versions of Title IX and the Affordable Care Act come into effect. To recap, Title IX is the law requiring schools and other institutions benefiting from federal funds to guarantee certain civil rights protections. No discrimination based on race, religion, nationality, and sex. That last one is the reason for the change, in keeping with the Supreme Court's ruling that both sexual orientation and gender identity are contingent upon legal sex. Both categories are now included in the Title IX protections against discrimination. A similar inclusion is taking effect in the Affordable Care Act, with discrimination protections pertaining to sex being extended to cover orientation and identity. Also, another new law is being added to the books. Michigan becomes the 20th state to ban the trans panic defense in criminal cases, and the second state to do so this year. You may recall from previous reports that the trans panic defense, like the gay panic defense, is used in cases where a murderer pleads not guilty due to the victim's identity. Shockingly, saying, I killed that person because they were trans, is a legal defense in 30 US states. And it works, as we'll discuss a little later on. Thankfully, in Michigan at least, it is no longer legal to kill gay and trans people for existing. It is incredibly depressing that such a state of affairs counts as good news, but it is undeniably better than lacking that bare minimum protection of the social contract. Next, presumptive presidential nominee Kamala Harris has been taking heat for not being progressive enough, particularly when it comes to trans rights. While there is of course room for criticism, it turns out that trans rights is one area the former DA has been surprisingly consistent in for decades. Chase Strangio, a lawyer for the ACLU, said in 2019, quote, Harris's work has contributed to some of the most violent conditions faced by trans people. A Them magazine article warned, quote, she has a concerning record of endangering our community's most marginalized members. But in 2006, 3 years before the infamous Proposition 8 brought the battle for gay marriage equality to the voters in Harris's home state of California, and a decade before there was even a whiff of transgender rights becoming an issue in national politics, she created a coalition of police, prosecutors, academics, and community representatives to help create policies to protect the human rights of trans people in criminal courts. For context, in 2004, while Hillary Clinton was pronouncing on the Senate floor that, quote, marriage is a sacred bond between a man and a woman, that same year, a case was making its way through the courts. A group of men had killed a child when they learned she was trans. They pled the trans panic defense, and 2 were convicted of reduced homicide charges. The rest receiving lesser offenses for it. After those reduced convictions, which was outside Harris's jurisdiction, it should be noted, she made it a priority to outlaw that defense. It took until 2014, when she was California's Attorney General, that she got a bill through the state legislature to make that a reality, and make California the first state to do so. The language of that bill became the model for other states up to the present day, including the ban in Michigan mentioned earlier. In the words of Shannon Minter, a colleague from those trans panic trials in the early 2000s, quote, "She's not just an ally. She's a long-time, steadfast, committed, and well-informed ally. She has repeatedly used her position and influence to help build more institutional and public support for our community. She has consistently strived to bring other people along with her and to create more allies for us. And that is the best kind of ally to have." Next, a former high school coach sues his school district over a trans sports clash. Coach John Parks, formerly of the Lake Oswego High School in Oregon, seen here being interviewed by professional transphobe Riley Gaines, was terminated from his job last month for violating discrimination policies and harassment. Parks, however, claims he lost his job just for writing a letter. Well, 2 letters. Well, maybe more than 2, depending on which interview you listen to. But however many, he claims this is a violation of his First Amendment rights, and on July 24th, he filed a lawsuit against the district. Now, a bit of backstory. You may recall back in May, we reported on Aiden Gallagher, the Oregon student runner who was booed by the crowd for winning one race while trans. What liars like Riley Gaines deliberately obfuscate is that Aiden lost another race earlier. The student who beat her was a Lake Oswego senior. Coach John's team's runner beat Aiden. So John was there that day and watched Aiden get booed by the crowd. According to him, he was moved to do something about it. He proposed a division of sport into men's teams, women's teams, and an open category where miscellaneous kids would be allowed to compete. That proposal is what his letters were about, he claims, and the real reason he got fired. In an interview on Gaines's network, he justified the proposal by saying, quote, "By having a separate division, you empower more transgender athletes to feel comfortable to come out, because right now, I think a lot would feel like, well, I don't want to do so to disadvantage, because I do have a physical advantage that's been proven by scientific studies done by the IOC and other international sports federations." While he may be feeling empathy for students like Aiden, whom he witnessed lose a race to a cis woman, no child should be booed by a crowd of alleged adults. And this proposal is ill-informed in a number of ways. First of all, he's forgetting that trans men and non-binary trans people exist, despite a non-binary runner in the sport he coaches being in this year's Olympics. He's also promoting the other common trope necessary for athletic transphobia to be possible. Women suck at sports. which is a curious thing for the coach of a women's sports team to say. From a practical perspective, it's also not a great plan. Many states have fewer than a dozen trans student athletes. Some include just one. How are schools supposed to have sports teams compete when there aren't enough kids to fill even a single team? Additionally, with women's sports already disgracefully underfunded, should the pool of athletic resources be further divided? But most of all, John is not just wrong about the proven science when it comes to trans women having a physical advantage. The actual study that he actually cites says the opposite. And that brings us to this week's Science Spotlight. The study John is referring to is one we've mentioned before on Transpositions Weekly, but this is a good time to go a bit more in depth. This IOC study was published in the June 2024 issue of the British Journal of Sports Medicine. From the abstract, the primary objective of this cross-sectional study was to compare standard laboratory performance metrics of transgender athletes to cisgender athletes. A group comprising of cisgender men, transgender women, and cisgender women underwent a series of standard laboratory performance tests, including body composition, lung function, cardiopulmonary exercise testing, strength and lower body power, hemoglobin concentration in capillary blood, and testosterone and estradiol in serum were also measured. In this cohort of athletes, transgender women had similar testosterone concentrations and higher estrogen concentrations than cisgender women. Lower lung capacity, less jump height, and a lower VO2 max also compared against cis women. Trans men had similar testosterone concentrations with cis men, lower absolute hand grip strength, and lower absolute VO2 max than cis men. While longitudinal transitioning studies of transgender athletes are urgently needed, these results should be a caution against precautionary bans and sports eligibility exclusions, particularly ones that are not based on sport-specific research. So, while Coach John may have his heart in the right place, he's woefully misinformed. It's a common problem. Like all trans issues, the folks opposing our human rights generally have no idea what they're talking about, or they've been lied to. That's why we're here, to clear up the confusion. And to Coach John, a word of advice: if you really do care about the best interests of trans students, maybe avoid appearing on programs devoted exclusively to maximizing harm to trans people. Now, an actual story of a person's rights being violated. Liberty University, known for being the evangelical indoctrination headquarters of Jerry Falwell, where disgraced impeached felon former President Predator Donald Jailbird Trump once offered a commencement address, has terminated a transgender employee explicitly for being transgender. From WFXR. On July 29th, a civil lawsuit was filed against Liberty University by the ACLU and attorney Butler Kerwood for discriminating against a transgender employee in violation of Title VII. Eleanor Zinsky worked for Liberty University from February to July 2023 as an information services apprentice at the IT help desk. According to court documents, she was successful in her role and was receiving positive feedback from her supervisors. Performance assessments stated she was doing, quote, well and meeting or exceeding all of her metrics, and was, quote, on the path to success. On July 5th, 2023, Zinsky sent an email to the university HR department notifying them that she identified as a trans woman and had undergone hormone replacement therapy. The university HR department emailed her back stating that they would respond to her email. Over a month later, she was still waiting. With no response forthcoming, Eleanor began to feel anxious. She reached out to the university with a follow-up email on August 8th and a meeting was scheduled with the HR department later that same day. During that meeting, which also included the Chief Information Officer, the Executive VP of Analytics, and the Executive Vice President of HR, Eleanor was terminated from her position immediately. In a letter given to her during the meeting, she was terminated explicitly because of her gender transition. The lawsuit states Zinski was intentionally discriminated against based on sex, violating Title VII with the termination of her employment, and that she suffered and continues to suffer mental anguish, pain, suffering, loss of income, litigation expenses, medical expenses, consequential damages, and other injuries as a direct result of this illegal act of specifically prohibited discrimination. Zinski is seeking a trial by jury and compensation in the amount of $300,000 plus back pay, damages, reinstatement, and attorney's fees, as well as, of course, court costs. We wish her well in her endeavor to seek justice. And our top story, Chloe Cole comes clean about the grift. From Aaron in the Morning, advocating against transgender people has become a lucrative business for a number of well-known individuals, including prominent political detransitioner Chloe Cole. A newly released audio recording reveals that Cole earns upwards of $200,000 for opposing transgender care, primarily through speaking engagements, donations, and her employment with the far-right hate group Do No Harm, which facilitates her access to opportunities to testify. The recording, which comes from Chloe Cole's testimony during a court hearing in Ohio regarding the state's gender-affirming healthcare ban, features Cole discussing her income and funding.
And you submitted testimony in support of HB 68 as part of your job with Do No Harm, is that right?
Yes.
And Do No Harm has helped you find other opportunities to testify in front of state legislators, is that correct?
Yes, yeah.
Do No Harm pays you $2,000 a month for their work, is that right?
Yes.
You made between $50,000 and $100,000 in speaking fees in 2023, is that right?
Yes.
Cole later added that she additionally makes $100,000 in donations, due in large part to her being a prominent political detransitioner. According to the LA Times, her reach is wide, including testimony before Congress and an invitation to be Speaker of the House Mike Johnson's special guest at the State of the Union address. She has appeared in documentaries and interviews around the world, and she even appeared on far-right mega-influencer Jordan Peterson's show. Though Cole has been a primary source for how the media understands transition and detransition, potentially due to the significant funding and influence from wealthy benefactors and influential conservative figures, her story is an outlier. Even the recent Cass review found that only 10 out of 3,000 youth who were either receiving or waiting to receive gender-affirming care had detransitioned by the time they reached adult care. That would be approximately 0.3%. Even among detransitioners, Cole's story is uncommon. According to a 2015 survey, most detransitioners did not choose to do so because they were not actually trans. Instead, they cite several other external factors such as job loss, reduced income, lack of family support, worsening political climate, social pressure, and so on. Importantly, 62% of those who did detransition eventually retransitioned. One detransitioner, who was among 19 who testified that their detransition should not be used to ban gender-affirming care, reacted to the news of Cole's income by stating, quote, "I'm one of the 19 detrans people who testified against the GAC for minors ban in Ohio last year, but I couldn't be there in person because I didn't have the money for transportation and a hotel stay. I couldn't afford to take the time off work. Not once was I ever asked for an interview or to do paid or an unpaid speaking gig. My story isn't even in the mainstream public news." Despite this, Cole's story remains one of the most commonly cited narratives in discussions about transition, detransition, and gender-affirming care, a narrative that has been well-funded and curated for use by Republicans to justify more anti-transgender laws. But the good news is that while this is a grift, and it is a very effective grift given the huge preponderance of anti-trans laws passed in the last few years, the good news is the fact it is a grift with a tremendous amount of money behind it is now a matter of legal record. If you enjoy content like this, make sure to subscribe. Support our work by becoming a patron at patreon.com/TheTransPositions and reap heaps of benefits. Our meme of the week was posted by yours truly, because the irony of the most infamous fraud in the world accusing anyone else of his favorite hobby is just irresistible. And if you want to cock-block the entire Republican Party, join us on Discord, where the memes live rent-free in the heads of the GOP. Also, if you have good news concerning trans people you'd like to see reported on, you can tell us about it in the Discord as well. For the Transpositions, I've been Ember Belrad.